With the tumultuous political climate of the time, many people are asking the question, what's really going on between Israel and Palestine? Many people think that this is a religious war between Muslims and Jews going back thousands of years. But is that the truth? In the previous RabbiHole documentary, the project detailed the history of European Jews and the colonization of Palestine, an act which was initiated under the manipulation of information, vital statistics, finance, world wars, revolutions, and epidemics. An expensive theatrical production that caused the deaths of millions of people and opened the door for the creation of the modern state of Israel. Thus far in this series, we have covered a plethora of topics, from the rise of the Rothschild family and their manipulation of war bonds and the financial markets in Europe, to the fall of the Ottoman Empire, from the Rothschild-funded colony in Palestine in the 1880s to the Russian Jewish colony in Jaffa, Palestine in 1890. From Theodore Herzl's first plan to settle Jews in Uganda to the Balfour Declaration. From the sinking of the Lusitania to the sinking of the British Royal Navy by the Germans. From Karl Marx and the birth of communism to the Bolsheviks and the rise of communism. From the rise of Hitler to the heist and fall of the Federal Reserve. From the manipulation of the media to the 6 millionth lie. From the Havara Agreement to the Holocaust. From the birth of Jewish terrorism to the Arab-Israeli War to the creation of Israel, and several other subjects in between. In this installment, we take an even deeper look into the history of the so-called Jewish people, highlighting their divisions, races, and ethnicities, their supposed ancestral right to the land of Palestine, and their assertion that they are descended from the ancient tribe of Judah. This project will also address some of the most vicious anti-Semitic rumors charged against Jews since the Middle Ages, to see if any common pattern arises. And finally, we will uncover prophecy to see what the Bible says about who these people really are. In 1666, Shabbatai Zevi proclaimed himself the Jewish Messiah and initiated the idea of all Jews moving into Palestine. And this was long before the Balfour Declaration or the creation of Israel. But were these people really even Jews? Is their claim to that land legitimate? These are just a few of many questions that arise about the history of Jewish occupation in the Middle East. Is their claim to be the ancient tribe of Judah legitimate? And if so, how could these claims be proven? In this special, we investigate many of these claims made by the so-called Jewish people to conclude whether they are legitimate or not. But even more important than just proving legitimacy is adding historical context to this entire conversation, without which no enlightened perspective can be gained. In order for this to be done, one must learn the basics of who or what is a Jew. From our understanding, because all language is subject to change over time, the term Jew is introduced as a biblical term. According to the 1611 King James Bible, the word in its initial usage specifically refers to a person from the tribe of Judah. Judah being one of the 12 sons of Jacob, aka Israel. Thus, Judah is one of the tribes of Israel. This was before the Exodus or the establishment of the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel. These were the first Jews. Other descendants, sons of Jacob, and their descendants were distinguished by each of their tribal names, i.e., Reubenites, Levites, tribe of Manasseh, and etc. Or they were just called Israelites in general. This label persisted throughout the times of King Solomon. After his death, the kingdom was divided into northern and southern factions. The northern faction was composed of 10 of the 12 tribes, whose capital was Samaria. The southern tribes mostly consisted of Judah, along with associated descendants from the tribes of Benjamin and Levi. After the Assyrian captivity, the term was later used to describe Jews who had returned to Jerusalem after captivity, following the decree of Darius and Cyrus of Persia. According to the Book of Kings, the 10 tribes were taken into captivity in Assyria in the city of Halah by the river Gozan in the cities of the Medes. This is the literary point in time when the amalgamation of the tribes, along with those who remained in Jerusalem, were uniformly tagged as Jews in the days following their return to Jerusalem. According to the scribes' chronology, in 323 BC, Jerusalem was later conquered by the Greek. After that, it was conquered by the Romans. Following the destruction of the temple in the supposed year of 70 AD, the Jews have been a people without a nation unto this day, according to biblical prophecy. Quote from Charlatan Central, explaining the Jewish diaspora following the days of Rome. Quote, following the failure of the second revolt against the Romans and exile, Jewish communities could be found in nearly every notable center throughout the Roman Empire, as well as scattered communities found in centers beyond the empire's borders in Northern Europe, in Eastern Europe, in Southwestern Asia, and in Africa. Farther to the east, along trade routes, Jewish communities could be found throughout Persia and in empires even further east, including in India and China. In the early Middle Ages of the 6th and 11th century, the Radhanites traded along the overland routes between Europe and Asia, earlier established by the Romans, dominated trade between the Christian and the Islamic worlds, and used a trade network that covered most areas of Jewish settlement. So once again, this is just reiterating the point that the Jews during the Middle Ages and during the Middle Roman era didn't have many problems with the Muslims. As a matter of fact, the Jews and the Muslims did great business together because Jews were the middlemen between Christians and Muslims, between Europe and Asia, or between Europe and the Middle East. So the idea that Jews and Muslims have been fighting a war for centuries is just not true. For one, the Muslims did not show up into the Middle East until the 7th century. By that time, those Jews weren't even a people or had just become a people through conversion in order to not have to take sides in the wars between Christians and Muslims. Most of the violence enacted upon so-called Jews during the Middle Ages was at the hands of Christians, not Muslims. We can clearly see that there was a relationship between Jews and Muslims going back hundreds of years of full cooperation and peace. Continuing, in the Middle Byzantine period, the Khan of Khazaria in the northern Caucasus and his court converted to Judaism, partly in order to maintain neutrality between Christian Byzantium and the Islamic world. This event forms the framework for Yehuda Halevi's work, the Khazari. But how much of the traces of Judaism within this group survived the collapse of the Khazar Empire is a matter of scholarly debate. Hey, we're not sure if those people are even Jews anymore. We don't know exactly what happened. Arthur Kessler in his book, The 13th Tribe, and more recently Shlomo Sand in his book, The Invention of the Jewish People, have recently, controversially, in parentheses, let's just go ahead and throw that in a parentheses, because we want you to know that it's controversial, have recently, controversially, theorized that Eastern European Jews are more ethnically Khazar than they are Shemitic. However, numerous genetic studies have not supported this theory. Have recently theorized that Eastern European Jews are more ethnically Khazar than they are Shemitic. And then look at all of these citations. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 citations. 10 citations that Jews are more Khazar than they are Shemitic. And then we only have 3 citations not supporting the theory. So of course we gotta investigate these citations in order to see who is really telling the truth. So this is one of the studies that is cited as not supporting the idea that Ashkenazi Jews are descended from Khazars. And this is from the National Library of Medicine, titled Abraham's Children in the Genome Era. Major Jewish diaspora populations comprise distinct genetic clusters with shared Middle Eastern ancestry. Quote, for more than a century, Jews and non-Jews alike have tried to define the relatedness of contemporary Jewish people. Previous genetic studies of blood group and serum markers suggested that the Jewish groups had Middle Eastern origin with greater genetic similarity between paired Jewish populations. However, these successor studies and monoallelic Y chromosomal and mitochondrial genetic markers did not resolve the issues of within and between group Jewish genetic identity. Continuing, 2 major differences among the populations in this study were the high degree of European admixture, 30 to 60%, among Ashkenazi, Sephardic, Italian, and Syrian Jews, and the genetic proximity of these populations to each other compared to the proximity to Iranian and Iraqi Jews. So we already know that at least 30 to 60% of the admixture of Ashkenazi is European admixture. Of course, that European admixture also technically is Caucasus admixture, okay? The European is a misnomer for Caucasus or Western Caucasus. This time of a split between Middle Eastern and Iraqi and Iranian Jews and European Syrian Jews, calculated by simulation and comparison of length of distributions, IBD segments, is 100 to 150 generations, compatible with a historical divide that is reported to have occurred more than 2,500 years ago. So they're saying that they used to be related 2,500 years ago. That is their claim to being Shemitic and having a right to the land, because they're saying that they were related to these people 2,500 years ago. But the question would be, are the so-called people that are being called Shemites, are they Shemitic? Because under the 3 bloodlines for which they are supposing to have Shemitic ancestry, there's Shem, there's Ham, and there's Japheth, okay? Hamitic and Japhethic are not Shemitic. So even their allusion to having some sort of Hamitic DNA does not make them Shemitic. They'll never mention this along with the study because it doesn't support their theory, of course. They are supposing the population groups that have formed the Middle East. The Middle Eastern populations were formed by Jews in the Babylonian and Persian empires who are thought to have remained geographically continuous in those locales. In contrast, the other Jewish populations who were formed more recently from Jews who migrated or were expelled from Palestine, and from individuals who were converted to Judaism during Hellenic and Hasmonean times. During Greco-Roman times, recorded mass conversions led to 6 million people practicing Judaism in Roman times. Wow, mass conversions. So they're saying that at least 6 million people practiced Judaism in Roman times. Were these blood-related Jews or were they mass converted Jews? Recorded mass conversions that led to 6 million people practicing Judaism in Roman times, or up to 10% of the population of the Roman Empire. Thus, the genetic proximity of these European, Syrian Jewish populations, including Ashkenazi Jews to each other and to French, Northern Italian, and Sardinian populations, favors the idea of non-Shemitic Mediterranean ancestry in the formation of the European, Syrian Jewish groups, and is compatible with theories that Ashkenazi Jews, for the most part, are direct lineal descendants of converted Khazars or Slavs. Whoa. The genetic proximity of Ashkenazi Jews to Southern European populations has been observed in several recent studies. I'm going to read that again. Thus, the genetic proximity of these European, Syrian Jewish populations, including Ashkenazi Jews, to each other and to French, Northern Italian, and Sardinian populations favors the idea of non-Shemitic Mediterranean ancestry in the formation of European, Syrian Jewish groups, and is compatible with theories that Ashkenazi Jews are, for the most part, the direct lineal descendants of converted Khazars or Slavs. And this is supposed to be the study that debunks that idea. Admixture with local populations, including Khazars and Slavs, may have occurred subsequently during the 1,000-year history of the European Jews. The 1,000-year history of the European Jews. So basically, the gist of this entire study is saying Jews are not Khazars. They're really just an even mix of Europeans and Middle Easterners. And notice that they say an even mix of Middle Eastern and European. No specific location, just European in general. No specific location in the Middle East, just Middle East in general. And that the mixing between these populations of random Europeans and random Middle Easterners, because we can't locate a specific location where these groups actually came from. So we're just going to say the Middle East, and we'll just say Europe. For one, that means that they couldn't be related to the ancient tribes of Israel or even Judah. And if the mixing occurred 600 to 800 years ago, how does that debunk the Khazar theory, considering that the Khazars didn't exist 600 to 800 years ago? The empire had already fallen. So even the idea that this study is somehow validating that disconnection between Ashkenazi Jews and Khazars, when they literally say they're an even mix of Middle Eastern and European ancestry who mixed at some point around 600 to 800 years ago, hundreds of years after the Khazars even existed. Yet we also know that Ashkenazi Jews can all trace their origins to that very same area in Russia. This is an example of how they create studies in order to validate their position. Not only are they trying to disconnect the Russian Khazarian nature and ancestry of 80% of all world Jewry, virtually meaning there's no way they could actually be descended from the ancient tribes of Israel, considering they are sons of Japheth and not sons of Shem. If we're going to use the word Shemitic in relationship to certain people, maybe they should actually be Shemites. Quote from Charlton's Web, Jewish and Ethnic Cultural Divisions. Quote, historically, European Jews have been classified as belonging to two major groups, Ashkenazim or Germanics, Ashkenaz meaning Germany in medieval Hebrew, denoting their Central European base, and Sephardim or Hispanics, Sepharad meaning Hispania or Iberia in Hebrew, denoting their Spanish, Portuguese, or North African base. The third historical term, Mizrahim or Easterners, Mizrah being East in Hebrew has been used to describe other non-European Jewish communities which have bases which are located further to the east, but its usage has changed both over time and relative to the location where it once was used. Timeout. First of all, historically, European Jews have been classified as belonging to two major groups, Ashkenazim or Germanics. Ashkenaz meaning Germany in medieval Hebrew. Ashkenaz is a son of Gomer. Ashkenaz meaning Germany in medieval Hebrew. That's not a thing. There was no Germany. Oh my gosh. Notice they say medieval Hebrew and not actually ancient Hebrew. Medieval Hebrew is nothing but Yiddish. And my favorite, a third historic term, Mizrahi or Easterners. Mizrach meaning East in Hebrew for the Mizrahi Jews. No, the Mizrahi Jews are named after Mitzrayim. Genesis 10, and the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mitzrayim, and Phut, and Canaan. Mitzrayim is the son of Ham, making that mean that these people are Hamites. Similar to how Ashkenaz means Japhethite. The term Mitzrayim does not mean Easterners in Hebrew. The name Mitzrayim is indicative, or Mizrahi Jews, is indicative of the son of Ham. And the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mitzrayim, and Phut, and Canaan. We go to these places to study truth, and then when you get there, they're lying to you. This is just another example of how these people orchestrate their lies in layers of deception. I mean, this nigga looked like he crawled straight up out the grave. Some dirty motherfuckers right here, bro. No, he smelled like a damn dachshund. The population of world Jewry is broken up into different ethnic divisions. The Ashkenazi population, the largest, their numbers are concentrated in Europe and, as mentioned before, originally hail from the Caucasus region. The Sephardic Jewish population is concentrated in Turkey to the west, just outside of the Caucasus region, but most of the Sephardic population is concentrated around the Mediterranean Sea in North Africa and Southern Europe, especially on the Iberian Peninsula. The Mizrahi Jewish sect geographically overlaps the areas occupied in North Africa by Sephardic Jews, but has more of a predominance in the Middle East. It's important to note that Mizrahi Jews were not recognized as a distinct ethnic sect of Jewry until after the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. The Ethiopian Jews are possibly one of the oldest remaining groups on that side of the world, tracing their histories back to the 4th century during the rise of Christianity. Unsurprisingly, the Ethiopian Jews have been ostracized by the overall Jewish communities of Europe and Asia, who ironically doubt their legitimacy as ancient Jews. These Ethiopian Jews have been routinely turned away from the borders of Israel, which all other Jews are free to enter. This article is from NPR. They speak Hebrew and keep kosher, the left behind Ethiopian Jews, by Gregory Warner. In the half-darkness of an adobe hut in Gondar, Ethiopia, 20-year-old Gezi Deribe pulls out an acoustic guitar. As on many evenings when the power goes out, he entertains his family by singing. Though his mother, Elish, sways to the tune, she doesn't understand the lyrics because Gezi sings not in his native Amharic, but in Hebrew. Behind him on the wall, kept cool with a traditional mixture of cow dung and ash, hangs a laminated map of Israel. Above it are framed photographs of his relatives who have already managed to immigrate there. So Gezi has dreams of Israel. I mean, imagine going to that place as a dream. Like, imagine that place being the place that you would dream to go to. Imagine seeing that place as the Holy Land or the Promised Land. We can see here that Gezi's been brainwashed by what he thinks the true Holy Land is. For years, it seemed like only a matter of time. In 2003, when Gezi was 8 years old, his family sold its land and livestock and moved to Gondar, a hub for the Ethiopian Jewish community. Gezi enrolled in a school run by the Jewish Agency for Israel and staffed by Israeli volunteer teachers, with a curriculum designed to prepare young immigrants for their future life. So Gezi is gung-ho. He's gung-ho about going to Israel. Gezi learned Hebrew and Israeli history and Jewish studies. His former teacher, Nama Avitster, told me that Gezi was not only the brightest Hebrew student in the class, but also the most grateful. He was so thankful for everything, Avitster says. He really cares about his Judaism. Gezi's Jewish education, unique in a country known for anti-Semitism, strengthened his sense of his own identity and believed that one day he would live in Israel. But the same organization that had granted him this education then informed him he would not qualify to go to Israel because he wasn't Jewish enough. The reason, one of his ancestors on the maternal side was Christian. According to traditional Jewish law, he is not technically Jewish. So we can see here that these modern Jews and the ancient Jews do not reconcile their generations the same way. It's almost like an exact opposite practice. So one would ask the question, what made them change from paternity to maternity? And we'll figure that out later. We'll find that out later. But just for now, we're going to keep reading. But Gezi has a reason to think that what's holding him back is not centuries old rabbinical law. More like centuries old, I don't fuck with niggas. Rabbinical law, right? But rather the more mercurial dictates of politics. If it were merely a question of biology, why would one side of the family have been allowed and the other not? Interesting. According to biblical law and genetics, you are your father's child because you get more DNA from your father than you do mother. However, according to the rabbis, that means absolutely nothing. More than 1,000 miles away in a high-rise apartment outside Tel Aviv, the walls hung with school-running medals. Why they had to talk about his dung and ash bedroom wall? Like, hey, he's got a bedroom. His room is made of shit and fire. Shit and ash. But he has a laminated picture of Israel on it. Anyway, that just kind of perturbed me. Like, nobody cares about his dung fucking ash walls. More than 1,000 miles away in a high-rise apartment outside Tel Aviv, the walls hung with school-running medals. Gezi's uncle Techelo and his cousin Haptu sit on the couch and explain that they got lucky. The first immigrants were easier, Haptu says. Whoever wanted to come came. Now there are many procedures to go through. Oh, we wanted you guys at the beginning because we were just creating this identity and we needed the numbers to make ourselves look stronger. But now we're strong enough, and you know what? You're actually not Jewish. Your mom was a Christian. Actually, it was your grandmother was a Christian. Your mom was an atheist, which doesn't, but if your mom had been Jewish or your great grandmother had been Jewish, that would have been okay. Your dad could have been a 1,000th generation Jew from the tribes of Israel, right? It wouldn't have mattered, according to the rabbis. This qualified under a stricter law. For Jews around the world, having one Christian ancestor would not disqualify them from becoming an Israeli citizen. Israel's founding law of return decrees that a person can immigrate to Israel if he or she has one Jewish grandparent on either side. Gezi has that. Oh, he's got a Jewish grandparent. But Gezi and his family are a special case because they're descended from a group of Ethiopians whose Jewish ancestors converted to Christianity under pressure in the 19th century. They are called the Falash Mura. They secretly practiced Judaism but were not allowed to immigrate with the other Ethiopian Jews until a hard-won political compromise a decade ago. Even then, Israel didn't approve them under the standard law of return, but rather stricter religious law that says to be Jewish, you need to prove an unbroken maternal Jewish line. It is under this stricter law that Gezi's Christian great-grandmother disqualifies him. Oh, it's under the stricter law. See, he had the preliminary law covered, but what they had to do is they had to move the goalpost for Gezi. And by them moving the goalpost, of course, all it does is create some sort of extended yearning to get to a place that is not even the place that he thinks it is. Avraham Negusi, the only Ethiopian-born member of Knesset, Israel's parliament, agrees that it was easier for the Falash Mura to immigrate back in 2003. And while there's no official change in policy in the years since then, the embassy staff in Addis Ababa appeared to want to pinch the pipeline. While previous interviews had stopped at 4 generations, says Negusi, who was elected last month, Israeli officials now require the Falash Mura to count back 7 generations to see whether they have, in the middle, any non-Jews in that lineage. Now we're going back multiple generations, and if we find a Christian on the maternal side, then you're done. These are stipulations that other so-called Jews don't have to follow. But for some reason, the Ethiopian Jews have to follow this unbroken maternal lineage. He says in a place like Ethiopia, where written documents are rare and there's a history of anti-Semitism, it can be difficult to prove the Jewishness of your great-great-great-great-grandmother. Of course it could. Oh, you don't have any documents? Oh, we need you to go back 300 years to make sure they're all Jews. Now, you could have all the fathers could really be related to King Solomon, but we don't count that according to the rabbis, right? So watch the deceptive fuckery on who they decide is a Jew. Finally, in 2013, Israel declared with great fanfare an official end to the program, and that helped tens of thousands of Jewish Ethiopians become citizens of Israel. There would be no more airlifts, though people could apply on a case-by-case basis. The Jewish school was closed. Negusi says that there are 6,000 people left behind in Ethiopia who are Jewish on their father's side. 80% of them have children, parents, or siblings in Israel. But you think they actually care about Jewish people or so-called Jews? Because they're willing to break up families to try to keep some sort of diplomatic red tape in between someone being able to cross the border into Israel. These people should be brought and reunited with their families, says Negusi. This is what we're asking. The question is where to draw the line, says JHole Palmore, a spokesman for the Jewish Agency of Israel. I'll tell you where to draw the line. Draw the line on anyone who looks a little bit too much like an actual ancient Israelite. We'll draw the line there. Everybody who appears Caucasian, we'll let them in. Anyway, let's see what JHole Palmore says. Quote, any person has family members who in turn have other family members who in turn have more family members, Palmore says. But if you don't put an end to it, then all Ethiopian population could see themselves as entitled to immigrate automatically to Israel. Any person has family members who in turn have other family members who in turn have more family members, Palmore says. If you don't put an end to it, then all Ethiopian population could see themselves as entitled to immigrate automatically to Israel. So you mean like every other Jew on earth? Every other Jew on earth could immigrate to Israel under the law of return, except for Ethiopian Jews. What they don't want is a bunch of Ethiopians in Israel claiming to be Jewish. Oh, listen, we cannot open our borders to Ethiopia. We can open our borders to any other so-called white Jew across the entire planet and possibly from Mars, maybe even the ocean. Still, he agreed that a case like Gezi was interesting. Gezi speaks Hebrew, keeps kosher, and as a result of the free Jewish education he was provided by the Jewish Agency, thinks of himself as a Jew. Palmore says cases like Gezi would be a very curious side effect of this operation to set up the school and provide an education according to Israeli standards. Israel's Ministry of Interior is in charge of approving or denying applications. It has a special committee looking into the issue of reuniting Ethiopian families, though activists say that committee has been in existence for more than a year without accepting or rejecting a single case. So they created this special committee in order to deny or accept, and all they're really doing is sitting on their hands. They haven't denied or accepted anyone. So by them creating this special committee, they can act like they're addressing the problem, right? Back in Gondar, Gezi tells me his life is like a bridge. He can't go back to the village where his family came from because it sold its land. Most of his former classmates are in Israel. Cousin Habtu just got married. Before I leave him, I ask him to play a song in his native tongue, Amharic. His teachers never taught him Amharic songs, he confesses. Only Hebrew ones. Oh, his teachers can completely disconnect him from his culture and create a nugget of hope for him to get into Israel, and then deny him that nugget of hope. End quote. NPR, Gary Warner. They speak Hebrew and keep it kosher, the left behind Ethiopian Jews. End quote. So what is the connection, if any, between these biblically referenced Jews and the modern Jews today? To understand this means to get an entire scope of the accepted chronology of the time and the transition from these people recording their own history to their history being written and recorded by their conquerors, specifically the Romans. Another pertinent question that must be explored is what happened to the Jews after the destruction of Jerusalem. The complexities of answering this question are not so simple to validate. The main reason being is because the only resources documenting the histories of the Jews following the siege of Jerusalem are Roman, and they begin with Flavius Josephus, a literary source that has been an open target of skepticism from biblical and Roman scholars alike. Josephus essentially became the top propagandist of what many call a false and fabricated history of the Jews, manufactured under the thumb of Roman Emperor Vespasian, whom Josephus was friendly with. The sources on their histories went from an established and well-known oral tradition practiced and taught for generations, the biblical tradition, to a written Pharisaic rabbinical reappropriation of those long-held Israelite traditions. The product of this transformation was the birth of rabbinical Judaism, in which the histories were transferred into a class of Romanized Jews who had long been in confederation with Rome since opening the gates of Jerusalem to the Romans during the conquest of Pompey in 63 BC. The most notable Confederate Jew of Rome being Flavius Josephus during the early days following the destruction of the temple, thus making all history concerning the Jews following his life a product of Rome that eventually molded itself into the version of rabbinical Judaism we see today. The original tribes of Judah and the 10 tribes of Israel whom had returned were either killed in the Jewish-Roman wars, sold into slavery, or expelled from Jerusalem altogether. Jerusalem was left completely disbanded and desolate. According to the academic narrative, Jerusalem was wiped off all maps by Hadrian, so Jews could never return to their capital. This is where the history of the Jews gets quite hazy, because the majority had been enslaved or expelled. There since has been no validly established history concerning these people. The Roman era introduced an entirely new Jew into the fold, the Caucasian Jew. Whereas the original descendant of the tribes of Judah or Israel were in general Jews by blood, the Roman era birthed the Jew by conversion. Most, if not all, Jews regarded as Jews in Roman literary history are not descendants of the original tribes of Israel, who are still estranged from Jerusalem unto this day. Instead, the inception of the Talmudic era becomes the cornerstone for all Roman recognized Jewry. It's not as easy as just saying these new Jews, who just so happen to be Caucasian, are indeed only Jews by conversion. Talk is cheap. So the evidence connecting the modern Jew to the biblical Israelite should be more than just talk. Unfortunately, the only evidence substantiating this claim is just talk. You'll be hard-pressed to find a single rabbi who can establish a legitimate ancestral tree connecting the modern Jew to a lost tribe of Judah or Levi. And yet, this is the ancestry they claim. And if they could prove it, they would be in direct violation of the very same beliefs of identity they claim to uphold. But let's slow down this fast-moving car on that dime for now. We'll circle back and pick it up later. Because another question of extreme importance is, if the evidence connecting these modern Jews to ancient times is virtually non-existent, where do these Jews originate? If not the ancient tribe of Judah, then where? This is just not a question of geography. This is also a question of genetics. And neither one of these answers to these questions are black and white. Firstly, the answer to the question of geography is a non-starter. There's not much, if any, evidence that the location supposed to be modern Jerusalem was the actual location of ancient Jerusalem, whose history was rebranded during the Roman Christian era. Nearly 300 years after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, Constantine's mother, Saint Helena, patron saint of archaeology and difficult marriages, claimed to have found the true cross. The true cross said to be the cross Jesus was crucified upon, and thus established a new location for Jerusalem and built the Church of the Holy Roman Sepulchre, which was built 300 years before the Dome of the Rock in modern Jerusalem. One of the most notable shreds of evidence proposed to connect the region to ancient Jerusalem are the Dead Sea Scrolls, which have been proven to be forgeries by the hand of someone who did not know ancient linguistic syntax, nor script style, or even the type of papyrus used during the times of ancient Israel. But let's just say the proposed location of modern Jerusalem is actually the true location of ancient Jerusalem. The Jews living there have no recorded history in that location at any time before or after the Roman era. Not only that, they would be going against their own prophecy. The current population of modern Israel, those claiming to be Jews, are actually from the Caucasia-adjacent regions of Russia, Ukraine, to as far south as Georgia. Of course, this is thousands of miles from modern Israel, with an entirely different geogenetic landscape than the so-called Levant. It's the reason why some people burn in the sun but can go barefoot in the snow. It's the same reason why those people who don't burn in the sun never held significant numbers in cold, high-latitude climate regions. And they get ashy. Well, at least I do. Skin tone is not a determining factor in the characterization of ancestry. Light and dark-skinned people exist between all races. There are light-skinned Negroes as well as dark-skinned Caucasians, Mongoloids, and Australoids. So in terms of skin color, latitude means more than location. But in terms of ancestry, location is paramount in determining someone's genetic makeup. Quote from Charlton's Web, Jewish and Ethnic Cultural Divisions. Continuing. The far more recent meaning of the term to include both Middle Eastern and North African Jews in a single term developed within Zionism in the mid-1940s, when Jews from those countries were all combined into one category as the target of an immigration plan. There you go. Let's combine our numbers because we're trying to create a country, so we need to appear strong. According to some sources, the current sense of the term as an ethnic group which is distinct from European-born Jews was invented at this time. The term constitutes a third major layer to come, and following the partition of mandatory Palestine and Israeli independence, Mizrahim's often forced migration led to their reestablished communities in Israel. The Mizrahi, for example, are a heterogeneous collection of North African and Middle Eastern Jewish communities, which are often as unrelated to each other as they are to any of the earlier mentioned Jewish groups. In traditional usage, and sometimes in modern usage, however, the Mizrahi are also termed Sephardi due to similar styles of liturgy, despite independent evolutions from Sephardim proper. Thus, among such Mizrahi are Iranian Jews, Iraqi Jews, Egyptian Jews, Sudanese Jews, Tunisian Jews, Algerian Jews, Moroccan Jews, Lebanese Jews, Libyan Jews, Syrian Jews, and various other groups. Notice they don't mention Ethiopian Jews. Other Asian groups that evolved separately from Sephardim include Georgian and Mountain Jews from the Caucasus, Indian Jews, including the Malabar Yehudim, the Cochin Jews, the Kakan Jews, B'nai Israel, B'nai Menashe, B'nai Ephraim, the Bukharan Jews of Central Asia, and the Chinese Jews, most notably the Kaifeng Jews. A lot of fucking Jews, bro. And I wonder, all these Jews, are they Jews by blood? Are any of these people Jews by blood? I'm just curious. I'm sure they're all related, right? Continuing. Despite this diversity, Ashkenazi Jews represent the bulk of modern Jewry, estimated between 70 and 80% of Jews worldwide. Prior to World War II and the Holocaust, however, it was 90%. Ashkenazim developed in Europe but underwent massive immigration in search of better opportunities and during periods of civil strife and warfare. As a result of this, they became overwhelmingly the majority of Jews in the New World, continents and countries, which previously were without native European or Jewish populations. Interesting, which were without native European or Jewish populations, Jewish or native Europeans. So the question would be, in the New World, were there any actual people related to the ancient tribes of Israel? This is all a deflectionary tactic because that place didn't even exist until 1491. And when it did, the first people to show up were Jews. I wonder if there was some sort of pipeline, pun intended. These include the United States, Mexico, Canada, United Kingdom, Argentina, Australia, Brazil, and South Africa. But with Venezuela and Panama being the exceptions, since Sephardim still compose the majority of the Jewish communities in those two countries. In France, the more recent Sephardi Jewish immigrants from North Africa and their descendants now outnumber the pre-existing Ashkenazim. End quote. Charlatan Central. Jewish, cultural, and ethnic divisions. It's important to get both sides of each perspective, so we're going to address certain stereotypes about Jews and look at them from the nature of being anti-Semitic, or anti-Japhethic, anti-Ashkenazic, not necessarily Shemitic, but Ashkenazic, anti-Gomeric, not necessarily anti-Semitic, but you get the point. Jacob's soul. Quote, as Francesca Trivolato shows us in her extraordinary book, The Promise and Peril of Credit, what a forgotten legend about Jews and finance tells us about the making of European commercial society. The bigoted cliche of the Jew as a representative of shady international financial deals has a long and error-filled history. The bigoted cliche of the Jew as a representative of shady international financial deals has a long and error-filled history. For centuries, Jews have been falsely credited with the invention of bills of exchange, which are considered essential to the origins of capitalism, but which are mistrusted as a form of financial trickery. Trivolato has discovered that this fundamental anti-Semitic story has its roots in a long-forgotten 7th century French legend about Jews and usury. A long-forgotten? It's a French thing. Yeah, it's just a legend, basically. Just a legend. Trivolato's discovery discovered the legend. Hey, we know where this comes from. Trivolato's discovery is based on her earlier work on how Jews indeed and other diasporic groups like Armenians gained financial prominence and expertise through trading within their international networks from the Middle Ages into the modern age. But capitalism and finance were not Jewish inventions. They came from medieval Italy with the rise of multi-partner firms. Where double-entry bookkeeping emerged around 1299, they also grew out of the credit markets based on bills of exchange, which had existed in one form or another since antiquity, but now became essential for international capitalist trade. Chivolado's main point here is that European Jews did not get their start in finance through usury or bills of exchange. To invest such great sums and to have the privilege to make such returns on them, even skirting canon law, was a practice deemed too lucrative and important to accord to non-Christians. Oh, listen, man, they would never give Jews the opportunity to do this, right? At any point. This was a Christian privilege. Hence, medieval and Renaissance banking in Europe was tightly intertwined with Christianity. The oldest bank in Europe, the Banca de Monte del Paschi Siciliana, nailed it. Founded in 1472, means Bank of the Holy Mount. Oh, I'm nice with the Banca de Siciliana. Bills of exchange were more complex instruments for moving and exchanging money via paper slips rather than sacks of minted coin. While they were not really a form of paper money, they were paper transactions that allowed bankers to move money, often internationally, using only promissory notes. Oh, yeah, I got you. All the while, rural and noble Europe, already suspicious and disdainful of the merchant class, frowned upon the mysterious credit mechanics of bills of exchange. It was not in Italy, but in 17th century France, as Trivolado shows, that the legend of the Jew as the inventor of the bill of exchange emerged in a long forgotten but once influential book of the merchant arts. John Clarac's 1647 Handbook, Usages and Customs of the Sea. The violent French wars of religion that pitted Catholics against Protestants in the last decades of the 16th century laid waste to much of France's urban commercial culture and threatened to destroy the ancient kingdom. Thus, in an attempt to boost commercial activity, the French monarchy decided to invite Dutch Portuguese merchants to the port city of Bordeaux. Dutch Portuguese merchants. Remember, we're talking about the 16th century. So many of these Dutch Portuguese merchants are whom? And they speculate and trade whom? The arrival of these new Christian or crypto Jews, the arrival of these new Christian or crypto Jews who had fled Iberia after the Inquisition. It's interesting how one flees a place to go enslave other people, also financed by the monarchs. Wild. The arrival of these new Christian crypto Jews who had fled Iberia after the Inquisition and their official expulsion in 1536 was considered contrary to Christian dominance. These false Christian traders from another land were seen as shady financiers whose money came from overseas and who, by their very ambiguous foreign nature, came to be associated with the untrustworthy and unholy bills of exchange. Really? So yeah, how did you get your money? Oh, you was over there. Okay. So you trade in that stuff. You trade in human cargo. And all right, sure, I'll trust you. Clarac's handbook on seafaring trade covered the rules, regulations, paperwork, customs, ports of call, and currencies necessary to be a successful trader. It focused on the complexities of marine insurance and bills of exchange, and with no historical grounding, it claims, it's interesting, and with no historical grounding. He had none, right? And I wonder what the historical grounding for all of these insertions of terminology throughout all of these stories, when they say false claims, right? They'll say, oh, these were false. It's just anti-Semitism. So what's the historical grounding that they were false? Continuing. And with no historical grounding, it claims that Jews, these abominable, uncircumcised who had been banned from France in the 12th century because of their wrongdoings and inexcusable crimes. Like, use a fucking better word. I fucking hate that word. Inexcusable crimes. Because of their wrongdoings and inexcusable crimes, had created bills of exchange and marine insurance to hide their perfidious. Fucking perfidious. All right. To hide their perfidious dealings. I hate the person who wrote this. I wonder if the person who wrote this. No. We'll figure it out. Perfidious. Fucking asshole. Continuing. All right. The question that the book leaves unanswered is how the medieval blood libel anti-Semitism, anti-Japhethism, anti-Ashkenazism, and this financial anti-Japhethism fused in the powerful brew that became modern anti-Semitism. One can imagine that it happened within various churches, Catholic and Reformed, that saw usury as evil and Jews as Christ killers. This Jews as Christ killers thing is just, it plays too perfectly into the dialectic between Christians, Jews, and Muslims, specifically taking place over there on that side of the world. Anyone who knows anything knows that the Jews didn't kill Christ. The Romans killed Christ. That's assuming that the figure of Christ existed. And it's highly probable that he did not exist. They saw usury as evil and Jews as Christ killers. Why do you think houses are so expensive now? Why do you think inflation exists now? Usury. How is the dollar worth 95% less than it was 100 years ago? Usury. I wonder what the ethnicity is of those people who are at the top of those institutions of usury. That's anti-Ashkenazic to say something like that. Continuing, that wider story still needs to be told so that we can understand how the anxieties of the Christian commercial world turned into an irrational belief so deep that it still dominates political discourse and social mores. Most surprising of all is that it took this long for a historian to tackle this legend and trace its origins. Oh, hey. Guys, they tackled it. No more questions. Trivolato figured it out. Trivolato's excellent book shows the power and the necessity of credible history to fight ever corrosive and dangerous legends alive and thriving in our own technologically advanced yet troubled times. End quote. Wow. Yeah, they just, listen, man, we got down to the truth. Nothing to see here. There's no shady dealings. And if there are, they're not Jews, for one. And if they are Jews, they're not. You're anti-Japhethite. End quote. Jacob Soul is a professor of history and accounting at the University of Southern California. His most recent book is The Reckoning, Financial Accountability and the Rise and Fall of Nations. End quote. Jacob Soul, American professor. He doesn't look like Soul's not a, this nigga gotta be a Jew. Jacob Soul, not surprised. Some people may ask the question, how did the Jews come to run world finance considering their history of oppression? The most popular answer is, the Catholic Church wouldn't allow Christians to lend money at interest to other Christians because usury was forbidden under Christian doctrine. So the church allowed Jews to lend money to Christians. Eventually, Christians accused the Jewish moneylenders of loan sharking and unethical financial practices, to which on multiple occasions, Jews were stripped of the right to lend money in England, France, Germany, Spain, and Italy, just to name a few places. A controversial subject in all circles stems from the supposed history of Jews in Europe, from rumors of debauchery and child sacrifice to the history of expulsion and oppression. Expulsion of the Jews occurred in Europe several times for several centuries, from the 7th century until the fall of the Moorish Empire in 1491, when many Jews immigrated to America. But why were these Jews so unpopular? Expelled from France multiple times, Germany multiple times, Italy multiple times, as well as England, Wales, Crimea, Portugal, and Spain. But why though? This is where information gets a little touchy. If you were to ask a Jewish scholar about why Jews were getting expelled from several countries, they'll say that Jews were victims of malicious anti-Semitic rumors that led to them being banished from different places. And of course, they'll say that all these reports of depravity practiced by Jews were completely false. So basically, these Jewish historians assert that the Jews were expelled for no legitimate reason other than anti-Semitism, which all amounts to saying they was telling lies. So Jews were kicked out of the country because people were lying on their names. It's important to note that the term anti-Semitism is a misnomer. The term implies that these so-called people are Shemites, but in reality, these people are Japhethic with some traces of Hamitic DNA. And if they do have any Shemitic DNA, it is least in comparison to any other blood. These people, by whatever definition of credibility, would not be considered Shemitic. In reality, the term anti-Semitism, in its usage as applied in relativity to this group, is a false and deceptive designation, fraudulently implying Shemitic ancestry where there is none. Yet the real question is, what caused all of these nations to unreasonably banish Jews from their borders? In the early Roman period, the most common charge levied against Roman Jewry was speculation that they were converting Christians into Judaism. Many groups were forced to convert to Christianity, and any refusal to Christianize resulted in expulsion. Overall, this would be an underlying issue between Christians and Jews. Moving into the Middle Ages, not only did their refusal to accept Christ perturb Christians, but Christians also felt that Jews were altogether responsible for the death of Jesus, and therefore deserved all the holy smoke. Ironically, today, Christians are jailed in Israel for converting Jews to Christianity. Now that's irony. Look at these dirty motherfuckers. They really think they chosen. Perhaps one of the most atrocious indictments against Jews in Europe were reports that they were mutilating Christian children in ritual human blood sacrifice. A scandalous rumor that even persists unto this day. But is there any truth to these rumors? Since the Middle Ages until present day, literally thousands of cases of human and/or child sacrifice have been charged against Jews. And in almost every case, there has been an effort across academia to catalog every example as an old anti-Semitic trope. The position of the scholars is, at no time has any Jew ever sacrificed a Christian child, or any child for that matter, and any assertion otherwise is anti-Semitic. Another rumor associated with Jews, specifically following the Crusades, is blame for the Black Death, a bubonic plague pandemic that killed by some experts as many as 200 million people. Although there are numerous records, trials, and confessions, modern scholars say that the allegations of well poisoning by Jews during the Black Death are completely false. Perhaps the most plausible incrimination of the Jews is their recorded participation in the world slave trade. This allegation lobbied against Jews has birthed a smorgasbord of butthurt charlatans looking to cape up for the koshers, producing books and papers attempting not only to disconnect Jews from their participation in slavery, but also labeling any proof of such activity as, bitch you guessed it, anti-Semitic. Now, we have detailed an extremely short list including the reasons why some people may have had some disdain or contempt for Jews. But it must not be overlooked that none of these rumors are true. Even the whispers about Jewish slave traders castrating male slaves for uses of exploitation because they brought more money at market are completely false. The actions of one group of people who just happen to be Jews doesn't equal the action of all Jews. So keep that in perspective moving forward. Jewish historians and scholars have attempted ad nauseum to debunk the idea that the majority of so-called Ashkenazi Jews have their roots in Khazaria during the 7th century. And yet, all of these attempts have fallen short of any credible legitimacy. Several genomic studies conducted by a range of institutions have all tied the ancestry of modern Ashkenazi Jews, the largest sect of Jews, to those very same areas north of the Caucasus once occupied by Khazaria. Nearly all Ashkenazi Jews can trace their ancestry to this part of Central Eurasia. Biblically speaking, these people would be Japhethites, sons of Japheth, sons of Gomer, sons of Ashkenaz, as referenced in Genesis 10 and the book of Chronicles as sons of Japheth. Ashkenaz, son of Gomer, son of Japheth, is the person from which this group derives their name. The tribe of Judah is part of the Shemitic bloodline under the progenies of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, none of which is said to have procreated with a daughter from the Japhethic bloodline, which would be the only way they could claim some sort of ancestry. Nonetheless, the Ashkenazim claim to actually descend from the lost tribes of Israel is barely plausible at best, and at worst a cunning manipulation of bloodlines and history to harvest a minute shekel of truth in order to cast a spell over the masses. And maybe this is why geneticists say nearly half of all Ashkenazi Jews are descended from just 4 women. Could those women have been from the tribe of Judah? Even if they were, that wouldn't be enough to be considered a Jew by blood, considering that the ancient Israelites reconciled their generations by paternal bloodlines and not maternal bloodlines. Ironically, as do the modern Jews. The descendants of the tribes of Judah and Israel, after being enslaved and expelled, were no longer a nation of people, and by all intents and purposes became lost in the wilderness and enslaved amongst the nations. No other histories were recorded of them outside of the scribes of Rome. All history from this point should be defined differently as the history of so-called Jews in lands ruled by Rome, because the fact is, knowledge of these people as a uniform ethnic group all but vanished from the fall of Jerusalem until the Middle Ages, with very few mentions of historical credibility. The Ethiopian Jew is by far more of an ancient Israelite through practice alone than any of these other branches. In fact, many of these sects still practice traditions that even the most devout so-called Orthodox Jews don't even practice, and for the most part adhere to ancient biblical law rather than rabbinical law. Of the groups of ethnic Jews that we have detailed up until this point, the Ashkenazim, the Sephardim, the Mizrahi, and the Ethiopian Jews, the Ethiopian Jews are by far the most closely genetically connected group among present-day Jews to the ancient Israelites. Who are the Jews is really a double-sided question. We've spent the better half explaining who the modern Jews are, but that's only the first part of the question. And given that we've already addressed the first part, the question goes as, if the modern Jew is not related by blood to the ancient tribe of Judah, then who is? I think many people already have an idea of who they are, so I'll humor you for a minute. Who are the modern Jews according to biblical prophecy? This is actually more than a double-sided question. It might be a triple-sided question, or even a polygon, eh? As we have learned, there are a variety of ethnicities among modern Jews, so we'll address the two most dominant genetic groups, the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim, to find their biblical parallels. Beginning with the Ashkenazi Jews, or the people or the ancestry related to the people in the areas Ashkenazi Jews hail from. Meshech, son of Japheth, is identified along with Moscow or the Muscovites from the areas around modern Poland, Lithuania, and all the way to Russia. Tubal is often mentioned side by side with Meshech, especially in the prophecies of Ezekiel. Tubal is most often associated with Turkey, the Anatolian Peninsula around the Caucasus region. Magog, for example, is mostly associated with Siberians, Scythians, and Mongols, while Javan, in concert with Tubal, are mentioned in Ezekiel 27 as merchants and slave traders. So by this prophecy in Ezekiel 27, we know that these people were once merchants and slave traders. Ashkenaz is mentioned in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 51, in connection with Ararat and Mani. Both of these territories are in the greater Caucasus region. Karaite Jewish historian David ben Abraham al-Fassi finds that Ashkenaz was the ancestor of the Khazars. The Sephardic Jews are also related to Tubal. However, that bloodline beginning in Turkey spread across the Mediterranean, intermingling with other sons of Japheth, especially in southern Europe and the sons of Ham in northern Africa. They spread as far as the Iberian Peninsula. Hence, the area where they're from in Turkey is called Caucasian Iberia. They were the first group to cross back over the Atlantic Ocean, bringing the first European Jews in to colonize the Americas. This was built upon their extensive shipping empire and multi-continental ports. These people are often associated with Phoenicians. Genetically, they are more closely related to Moors than Ashkenazi Jews, meaning this group has more actual Shemitic DNA than Ashkenazi Jews as well. They are said to hail from the land of Sephardic, supposedly a land where Israelite captives, after the first Assyrian invasion, had been deported by King Sargon. For the most part, these people assimilated into Assyrian culture. According to the second book of Kings, the Sepharvaim, for whom the Sephardic Jews are named, burned their children by fire in sacrifice to gods Anamelech and Adramelech. If there is any connection between ancient Israelites and these two groups of either Sephardic Jews or Ashkenazi Jews, the only group that could have any possible connection to ancient Israelites would be the Sephardic Jew. However, they are both mixed with Edomites, the sworn enemies of Israel. Genesis 36 explains the dukes of Edom were the sons of Esau, descendants of his union with Canaanite and Ishmaelite wives. They became the dukes of Europe and the Holy Roman Empire. Edom is Rome. Duke is a title just below king or emperor. Long ago, the sons of Esau made a pact between themselves that they would only be governed by foreign rulers. Hence, why all the so-called Jewish archdukes of extreme wealth across European history were never kings. If there are people who would be considered the ancient tribes of Israel, it would be the Negro, the American Negro, South American Negro, Caribbean Negro, who has been tricked into believing he's African by those very same Jews who first colonized the Americas. Perhaps the biggest conspiracy perpetuated upon mankind is the fabrication of world history and the falsification of ethnic identity. There is only one group of people living whose history matches the prophecies of the Bible as it concerns the displacement of the Israelites. And it's definitely not the so-called Ashkenazi or Sephardic Jews. Rome created Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Through these creations, they became the puppet masters of world history. Hey, they crying on the wall like they them. These niggas crying on the wall. That's not even the actual wall. They gotta know, right? Because if they know and they're still going through with the whole charade, that shit is sociopathic, bro.